City of Stevens Point Downtown Business Improvement District meeting, recorded April 4th, 2023.
Yes, we're all set. We're all live and presenting.
Okay.
Just got to set up.
Okay, well, welcome, guys. We can start with roll call. Rosalind, do you want to read roll call?
Tara Mansky.
Absent. Tara is not responded to call today.
Hannah Cutler.
Here.
Mike Beacom.
Here.
Gina.
Here.
Chabutowski. Brian Cummins.
Here.
Rosalind Kellier. Here. And Alderperson Christensen. All right. All
Beautiful.
here.
Agenda item number 2, members of the public wishing to address the Board of Directors on an agenda or non-agenda item may do so at this time. Is anybody here that wishes to address the Business Improvement District Board of Directors? Going once? Going twice? Sold. Agenda item number 3, Main Street application update. So we need to talk about the application review and talk about the 4-point approach. The application, did you get a chance to look at what Chris sent us?
I did. I looked
Okay.
at it more than once. I just didn't really, I think,
I put a couple comments in
Yeah.
there, but nothing huge and major. I felt like what we had in there was good enough to submit at this point, and if they have further questions, we can address them as they come up.
Okay, so the application was included, or the draft application was included in your packets today as well. So for your review, there will be some minor changes for our signatory. I think we will be actually changing that from Mayor Wiesa over to you, Gina, since you are the
Okay.
chairperson for the organization. Just applying on behalf of the City of Stevens Point. So
Sounds good.
Still have me writing the application, but list you as the main contact. The application's due the 14th, y'all. So if you have any additional comments, need to change anything, I think the other point of bringing up the application is also to start reviewing our strategy setting and how we're approaching that. So it's a really big question in that application.
And the large part of that is the 4-point approach question. So has everybody had time to look at this at all? It went out early. Perfect. So that 4-point approach that got broken down, Chris took the liberty of typing up a really good start to what we should be looking at going forward. Keep in mind, as you read through it, if you're going to look through it, it is a living and breathing idea at this time. So a lot of those things that went in there are just things that we've already talked about, problems that have already been identified, hurdles and issues we'd like to see addressed sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I will say that in the writing of I guess answering that question and that 4-point approach, the bid operating plan that was drafted that you all received as your onboarding document. This is our basically charter for this body, was used to answer that question. So if there are any other like big gaping holes within that strategy or approach, we also may want to review that operating plan in the future.
Yeah, bring that up at the next point. Never mind.
One thing I also wanted to share with you all too, I don't know if you got to take a look at some of the data points that we had pulled for the application, so a number of buildings and specifically a number of vacant buildings, but there was a pretty detailed overview about when buildings were constructed, what the values of those buildings are as a whole, and how many of those are vacant. So we have a rough estimate of our vacancy rate for the downtown.
I believe it was 74% full.
Correct, so that's our occupancy.
Yes. And if you read the 4-point approach, one of those addressed that we'd like to see it up to 80% within the next 5 years, which is a very aggressive goal, but it's a goal that I think is attainable if we can continue to organize and then work towards revitalizing the downtown to make it more appealing for businesses to move towards.
More active programming.
Or that too.
And on vacancy, it was either completely or partially vacant, was how it was defined, correct?
Correct.
with the 4%.
With the 74%.
74,
Correct.
sorry.
Yes.
Yes, so I tried to be very standardized, so that way from year to year, we can say, okay, that building has one vacancy out of perhaps 2 or 3 available units within it. We still consider that property vacant, or there is some level of vacancy within it.
Were there properties within that survey that are not going to be rentable, they're not marketable? I mean, for example, the space that's part of the library that everybody talks about, but it's not really their community room. I mean, how do you?
That is rentable, so that space.
Okay.
Yeah, so for spaces that are owned but not necessarily being advertised or rented, we're still considering those as vacant. So anything that remains unused, we're considering vacant for this application and for future measurement, because it is technically space that is not being utilized.
And did that include new construction like the North Side Yards rentable
Correct.
spaces?
It also included the Great Northern Distilling Building as an example, even though we know that there is a tenant that will be utilizing that space.
It's not
still
occupied.
technically not occupied.
Correct. Yep.
So,
Our buildings also.
just to,
So,
correct.
you know, with yours opening, with ours opening, that already helps us a lot. And, you know, when that happens, our numbers will look better.
Right.
Any other questions about the Main Street application? Anything you guys felt was missing that would be beneficial to include at this time?
I thought it was a really thorough shot at this, and I think, like you said, it's a living document at this point, but there's nothing I would have changed aside from small stylistic things, so really well done. You know, there's a lot on the plates right now, so.
Yeah. Awesome. Do we feel any further group review needs to be done of this, or do we feel comfortable leaving this in Chris's hands to officially submit with my signature?
What did we respond when it asked whether or not we'd have a fully signed person within 3 months?
I believe that answers should be included within your application documents.
It is on here, and I do believe we said we plan to have somebody within a year. I think we specified our timeline is different than their timeline.
Yeah. It should be openly denoted in the document that, and if it's not accurate, you can revise it, but it should be listed that we plan to hire.
I do remember seeing it, I just don't remember where.
The
Oh, the job description.
job description is also noted to change as well.
Yeah, so we
Since we're
said there is
open.
presently no job description for the Main Street Director, as the role will largely be developed within the first year of the Business Improvement District and hired or split amongst the Board of Directors. And then it has a previous job description that is noted as a previous job description when the Main Street program was enacted prior, just as a rough guideline of what we can look at to create our own. Do you have anything to add?
Not for the draft of the application. You provided your comments. I can go back in and edit that, but Hannah, if you can help me with just another
Yeah,
review over to
Mine
ensure
were all
that it's
pretty
all-
minor, so.
Okay,
yeah, I'll go over it again.
sounds good.
I'm assuming there's pictures, we just couldn't see them right.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is a map and 15 photos. If you would like to see all specific photos, we can forward those.
Good job. Okay. As far as the 4-point approach, that was kind of included in that. If anybody has any.
Well, I think we wanted to stop for a quick conversation about that too.
Okay, sure.
So the 4-point approach is the WEDC's tool. As I'm going to call the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation's tool for gauging community transformation. And within your applications, we've been asked to respond specifically using that tool as markers for success. And so I wanted to bring this forward for you all to review and potentially for thinking about structuring this body as a way of measuring success, what metrics that we're gathering around these 4 elements and strategy setting using our operating plan and these 4 categories. How we can be driving that Main Street manager position and also structuring this body to maximize volunteer support and board support for those 4 pieces. I think Gina, when you and I had talked about this tool, we wanted to share with you all a brief overview of it, but wanted to also assign out a review of this tool and how it would be used to benefit your different representative groups, and starting to brainstorm actions that could be included within that Main Street director's position. Is there anything else in that? I want to touch on?
I don't think so. I think if anybody wanted to review this and start trying to think about ways that it can come back and, kind of like you said, benefit your business, benefit the downtown, benefit either one of these 4 arms, relate it back to what we wrote in this application and see if we can grow on some of these things that we already put down, that we've already talked about. And if there is anything glaringly missing that fits under one of these 4 arms, we should talk about it sooner than later to come up with an integration strategy into how we're going to develop moving forward. But
Are you wanting any action?
it's so hard to put an action on this right now because I think that review of this mixed with this and everybody kind of taking into account their own industry is going to be not something that we can do at this time. So I guess an action item would be to go back and everybody look a little bit deeper at this. Send me an email, me and or Chris an email if things come up. But I think at our next meeting, we should maybe have something relatively concrete. But this also goes along with the MOU that we're going to talk about next. So, because a lot of what this is has to think of the good word, mesh with the betterment and whole of downtown instead of just bid board focus. Downtown focus, everyone needs to be on board towards working towards these same goals. They're not just our goals, they're goals of the downtown that we need support and full team involvement to accomplish. So
just a quick question on this. To me, this is a very mom and apple pie kind of thing. I mean, this is obviously what should be a part of a plan. Are we supposed to then, every effort, measure it against how does this address all 4 points? Or what's the real use of this?
When we met for orientation, Hannah, Mark, Tara, and I, in Chippewa Falls, it's not intended to be used as a tool. I guess any action item that you take does not need to address all 4 categories.
Okay.
It could address just one, it could address 2, or it could address any combination. But when you're thinking about all of the tools or all of the action that an organization or a community is taking in an area, you should be addressing all 4.
And this is just Main Street's recommended model.
Sure.
So this is just a really good starting point based on what other Main Streets have used and other Main Streets have started with. If we feel this doesn't fit what we need it to fit, then we don't use it. But at this point, it seems like a really good starting point to identify the things that we did talk about when they came for their visit and be able to then put that into a formula to work towards accomplishing that. If we feel there's a 5th or a 6th arm, okay, maybe now then we're just getting down into too many categories and we need to start thinking about the overall big issues, medium issues, and small issues and start targeting those in something similar at a time. So as of right now, for an example, something like wayfinding that has been mentioned a couple of times does fit in all of these. That helps all of these naturally. But something like snow removal that's also been mentioned doesn't necessarily fit in all of these.
Sure.
But if you try hard enough, it can touch all of these. So hopefully that helps. I don't know how deep we wanted to dig into this today, but I think that everybody actually taking some time.
Yeah, I think in our initial conversation, we want to present this as a tool for you all to review and as for discussion points between board members. If you need to ask something of another board member, to utilize that as a conversation piece. I know some of you have already reached out to discuss certain specific topics, whether or not that's business retention or real estate redevelopment or maintenance programs. This is another lens for you to review those actions through. Okay.
Any other comments or questions on this specific 4-point approach that we're going to try to use as a lens right now? If anything comes up, if there are questions, if there are ideas, if there are topics, if there are anything that comes up while you're looking at this alongside our application, email me, email Chris, and we'll try to put them into something that can be reviewed for the future meeting to hopefully come up with something that'll give us some more direction specifically for our area. Okay. Moving on, the MOU work group, which is Chris and Hannah, right?
And Sarah.
And Tara. Okay, Chris and Hannah.
And Mark.
And Mark.
So at our most recent MOU meeting with the Stevens Point Alliance, we had discussed the possibility of, I guess we discussed two different things. One, we needed to get a draft out on the table to start revising, and it was the, I guess, recommendation of the group to utilize Appleton Downtown Inc.'s format, because that is a similar format to the amount of organizations that we have existing within our community, both the Business Improvement District, 501c6, and a 501c3. So I've been in contact with Jennifer Stephanie, who's the director of Appleton Downtown Inc. quite a lot the past couple of weeks, discussing some of the modeling that they use to generate revenue for their organization for their downtown. So a draft MOU was put together, was presented out to you all, and our next meeting is tomorrow. We would be meeting with Stevens Point Alliance representatives, the Commission Visitors Bureau Director, Sarah Brish, will be joining us, because she has vocalized that she'd be interested in providing support to a Main Street director, whether or not that is something as loose as providing space for that director or jointly hosting a position. So she'll be included in. But I wanted to present that draft to you all also for revision and feedback, as this is a pretty big document that guides your work in alignment with the Stevens Point Alliance's work. Open up the floor.
Hannah or Mark, did you guys have any feelings, thoughts, things that came up, anything that came from that meeting?
I think it was pretty productive. I think it's going to be key as far as, especially if we want to participate in the Main Street program, where no single entity can provide more than 50% of the finance, having, I think, at least 3, if not 4 separate entities that'll be participating and supporting those efforts. They found that for longevity's sake, if you just have a couple and one pulls out, that makes it really hard. So I think diversifying that and capitalizing on the strengths of each of the groups, I think should bear a lot of fruit.
Anything you wanted to add? Okay.
So I guess as the initial author, I wanted to ensure that you felt comfortable also picking this apart if there are any major categories that are missing. Again, this is just an initial draft utilizing the documents that we've got available, and a few other community resources. So major categories that are missing, if the action items or if there's any reservations or empowerment for what action we're taking on or assignments.
So I don't want to be a dark cloud, but this, in looking over with this, and full disclosure, I met with Kathy this morning. She wanted to meet with me before the next MOU meeting to talk about the SPA and how they feel and what they think, and after she had time to review this and wanted to talk to me about this, so I reviewed this. My biggest, SPA's biggest, and my biggest, I guess, between what Kathy and I talked about this morning, was that putting something like this in place makes it very difficult for flexibility of responsibility going forward. Concern that I personally had was the city's ability and capacity to actually handle all of the things that the city is listed on. And a couple of the things in here was managing the agreement and updating the position description of the downtown manager, which after conversation, even just within this board, shouldn't be managed by the city. It should be managed by a different entity. Managing cleaning contracts to oversee general cleanliness of downtown. Those are very blurred lines. So my main concern with what was written up here is, firstly, the city's capacity to fulfill all of the things that the city is labeled on. But second most is the image and relationship that this is particularly going to portray to the community, that these groups are not working together. They're contractually obligated to talk to each other. And I don't know if that's something that anybody else has felt, but I feel like that's necessary to at least vocalize out loud. So those are my main concern takeaways from this. And I guess as an alternative, instead of just to say things I don't like, an alternative is to make a very basic memorandum of understanding of something that we want to agree to get to in a year, which might be a handbook of how downtown businesses work, or I guess I'm not really sure what the best word is, a handbook, that then people can sign a single charter, whereas this can be a living document, but the charter can say, to the best of our ability, we're going to follow this just like your last page did. And that being said, this MOU is only between us and SPA, whereas the CVB might come in 6 months from now, or another nonprofit might be established, and then this has to be revisited, revised, and re-signed by everybody. Whereas if a handbook or something similar about how downtown organizations need to function or should function, this charter can be the thing that people sign, and this document can be reviewed annually with all of the organizations. I apologize for all of that brain dump on this, but I only got to review it yesterday. So those are my thoughts.
I guess the way I look at it, I mean, most of these things have multiple entities that are in charge of each thing. There are very few where it's a single entity. I think it's helpful to have certain responsibilities delegated to, the hard part, if you don't have someone taking at least one or two taking a lead role, a lot of times things fall through the cracks. Most of this is a memorandum of understanding between the entities, but there's still going to be annual action plans developed by this group that will actually be the guiding document, and will be making the, I think, more specific decisions of how things are going to proceed at that point in time. So I see this as being kind of the grand plan, but as far as specifics on an annual basis, that's going to be part of that annual working plan that will be each year going through.
For some context, this document, the document that we're using from Appleton Downtown Inc., they revise annually.
Right.
That is this document,
So this document-
MOU,
Okay.
would be an annually reviewed and revised document if
And
you
I
were to
think-
follow that template.
I think that would be good.
So it's not that it's a set in stone work plan. It's a work plan that is reviewed by all bodies and all organizations.
I think if we don't make lanes for people to, kind of stay in, obviously, I get what you're saying in terms of we want everybody, we're playing as a team, and we all are doing this together, ultimately, all of us. But I think if we don't put some type of, assigned name to the chore, then, like he said, things might forget about doing them, or somebody won't feel their responsibility. And I think if that is understood in here, that all these things are all of our problems ultimately, you're just in charge of it. So I think that is important to do, rather than just, here are all the things, a list. They're not going to get done. That's how I feel.
In terms of managing the individual, the person we hire, I do feel like that has to be one body versus multiple. This is saying job description, multiple, and evaluating that. But I feel ultimately if that person is answering to 4 different groups, that could be a challenge. I don't know if that's really specifically addressed here, but how do you see that? Do you see that person answering to this board? Well, step 2, probably. I mean, step
gonna
one.
say-
Step 1 is kind of an in-between with Sarah's group, I understand.
If you're the one signing a contract for an employee,
Right.
then you would have the autonomy over that employee.
Okay.
So if you share that hiring power with another organization, then they would be also available to that organization.
And I think with what we're looking at for year one, that's what's available to us. I do feel like long-term that could present an obstacle, because that's the one thing we've always feared with whoever housed this person is a tug of war and which hat are they wearing when. Maybe that's not something we need to address in year one, but it is something I think we need to be conscious of.
I think that's fair.
So are there any thoughts about how yours and Kathy's concerns can be addressed? I know we'll talk about this tomorrow as the MOU work group, and so Hannah and Mark, perhaps I can lean on you to be cognizant of that concern in drafting. But if there's any other thoughts about addressing some of those concerns about,
I'm assuming those are Kathy's concerns as well?
Some of them. The city's capacity is mine, and I didn't express that in our meeting this morning.
Okay.
That is a large concern of mine, just because I know, well, I don't know, I don't work for the city, but a feeling I get is that the city has a lot to do. So if we're going to continue to add to that plate of what to do, it's only going to potentially cause frustration and stress within us.
I don't
We're
know that-
leaning on Chris for so many things, and Chris doesn't have time to do these things, or if Ryan needs to do these things, or we expect this of the city, and there's no capacity to do that. So that was a big concern of mine. And then with the stringency of this, the very strict cut and dried, even if it is a living document, I almost feel like using an MOU as a means to an end is better than having it as the end, i.e., if this can become a year from now, we're agreeing to work together, and this is how we'd like to work together at this point, and have these documents in place. So the two documents that were referenced in here, the city's comprehensive plan and the downtown targeted area master plan, I have not reviewed those. I don't know what those are. But saying that a year from now, all parties will review all of those to come up with a new downtown plan that is included and utilized by the Main Street program that we are hopefully now going to be a part of. I feel like a MOU can be leveraged that way almost, better than having our cut and dried, again, could be a living document, but cut and dried, this is what we're doing now, because I feel like we're still in the org phase and don't really know what we're doing now. So,
I think that's true, but I think this is just a starting point and then gets revisited in a year. I think it'd be foolish to think that we're able to foresee everything, and so it is a living document, and then I'm sure there'll be some tweaking that'll be part of the ongoing review process each year. And so if things are flowing well with this as a guideline, that's great. If there's some responsibilities that need to be shifted, this board will have that opportunity to do that as well.
How were these responsibilities delegated? How did they?
it was an
Based on
initial draft.
applicants?
And so another reason, or another response too, for your concern, Gina, about what the city is offering up, there was a huge concern from the Stevens Point Alliance that the city will be letting go of responsibilities that it provides already and provides elsewhere. So I tried to make sure that all the responsibilities that the city is already has is figured in here.
Yeah, so there, a lot of these they're already doing. That's
doing.
why I wondered if that
So
was.
that's why we're not necessarily adding.
sure.
It's already, it's just something that we're addressing.
Sure, and to what you said too, like if this is a living document, that's great, and living, I feel like I've said living document 1,000 times now, sorry. But something goal-based within this makes me feel better about it. And with the relationship that everybody kind of feels exists between different downtown organizations, that is not the healthiest of relationships, having this not have goals that we are working towards together makes this just kind of a flat piece of information that we have. Yes, Ryan?
Thank you. Just real quick, I don't want to interrupt the discussion, but because of quorum problems with you meeting with Kathy outside of the MOU group, the concerns that you're raising should only be focused on your specific concerns, not that of the SPAs.
Okay.
Including the SPAs actually violates open meetings laws, and I just
Okay.
want to be super cognizant of that, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so that's, I guess, all I have to say on that then for now. But those are my two main concerns.
If I'm hearing you correctly, there's concerns, just one concern essentially about a goal that we're all moving towards.
Yeah, having this have at least something to work towards instead of just, this is what we're pitching.
Yeah.
Right.
So the 5 major impacts listed at the top are intended to be what we're working towards. And so if you have recommendations for goals that we should be moving towards, I would highly recommend including it within the document and using that as a forum for that.
So as I was reading these points, I was wondering how we do these things because they seem they seem difficult, but like diversifying the types of businesses downtown, I don't know how we do that as a, like, because businesses are private, people can have business. So how do you see us doing these things?
Would anyone who attended the orientation like to chime in on some of the examples that were shared?
It's a direct stare, Chris.
It is a direct stare.
What the examples were.
So there were some examples that had been given to us, and part of the Main Street programs that we could create or leverage to expand the diversity of businesses. That answers your question. There are examples of things that exist already that we could use.
Okay, so it has been thought about, because to me, this seems a little out of our control. It seems, so.
It's not though, because even if there's available, properties, you can be part of advertising it and sharing different possibilities. There's one community, they needed a restaurant, and they actually went out and advertised and basically had like a competition, and people came in and cooked for them, and they went through and show, and they ended up bringing in a restaurant, and the person was very excited about it, and it's still a very successful ongoing, so that's just one example of something that you can do. So
At Marshfield too, they went and did clean coffee shops in Marshfield and downtown, and so they went all over and talked to the coffee shops that were already in business and asked them to come.
So if you see a need, you can proactively go out and look for people and promote the idea.
Yeah, I receive a mailing from, I think it's Lake Geneva, like twice a year, asking to start a distillery. They
really
spam
want
out
ya.
all the distilleries.
Yep.
Well, not me specifically.
I think they
but
just
like-
want you.
Thanks, Hannah. No, but they do specifically target industries for different business development
Okay.
opportunities.
So it could be through a targeted outreach to existing business owners. It could be through new launch programs. There are, I think, more examples of some of those new launch programs, like vacant storefront competitions, that you could base anything off.
Then what is a presenting partner?
Great question. So a presenting partner is a relationship between two organizations to host an event. So if you're a presenting partner for, say,
Co-host.
yeah, exactly. However, with a presenting partner, you generally take on more of the responsibilities of the event hosting.
Okay.
So, for example, if you were to approach Point Brewery to co-host Pointtoberfest in the future, be a presenting partner in that, take on some of the difficulties of organizing the event for an exchange of bringing the event to a certain location.
So my only other question was, is the Visitors Bureau and the SPA actually going to work with us? Because last time we met, I thought it was still in question a little, but they are all on board and it's really happening.
We'll know more tomorrow.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the
So-
MOU is what needs to be really signed, or, we need to look at that, we need to agree to.
So this is just the
Agree to do
agreement
an
form?
agreement.
Okay.
Somehow.
Okay.
But I think that all parties are very interested in working together.
Okay, good. I just didn't know how it ended with our last meeting. That's all of my questions.
Chris, what do you have in mind? Establish a property redevelopment policy to standardize requests for proposals?
What do I have in mind for it?
Yeah.
That's just maybe a sample tool to say if the city or an entity were to acquire property, what is the standard protocol for?
So would that be like the Belkey property, something of that scale, I'm guessing? Or like Shopko?
Or even, I guess another similar situation would be one of the city-owned properties on Church Street, for example.
Okay.
There exists some considerations for that property, but having a protocol to lean back to if that want to move quicker on announcing either an RFP or going through some sort of redevelopment feedback process with downtown partners.
There were things I liked. I liked the one social media identity. That was a good one. A positive.
And that's something to model after Appleton, if we look the way Appleton has done it. They have their three arms, but they have downtown Appleton,
One thing.
the place to be or something. Yeah, having that overarching image that we can all utilize and leverage. Any further comments, questions?
Missing categories, missing items, appreciate the concerns.
MOU group, do you feel like you have enough to bring tomorrow?
I think from our standpoint, we'll find out from the other entities and see how they feel.
Who's there? Who's going tomorrow?
I'll be there. Hannah will be there.
And Tara will be there?
Tara,
Tara's
she's
anticipated to
one
be
of the
there.
other, yeah.
And that's not a problem with the 3+ you?
No.
Because you're not a voting
Not a
member.
voting member.
Okay, just
And
want to
then
make sure.
it's the Visitors Bureau and the Stevens Point Alliance. Okay. So this expenses stuff will come later, right? This, you just left.
That's
Okay.
anticipated to come later. So, for example, I left those as placeholders to say that if you hired a Main Street manager and the Business Improvement District were to carry the brunt of that cost, that it would be listed that you're providing that service or that to the table. Same thing would be for the Stevens Point Alliance and their marketing staff that they hire.
But if that person is hired or is housed at the Convention and Visitors Bureau, that's an in-kind
Contribution.
space
Yeah.
contribution to the overall budget.
Yeah, correct.
So if they're housed at the CVB, just like we had just mentioned, they would answer to the CVB.
Not
Not
necessarily.
necessarily, it depends who had the contract as well.
Right.
They may just be providing the space.
But it might be that they only answer to us what was the percentage of time that they need to, they might be an employee of.
Hours a week, I
32.
believe. 32
So
hours a week.
32 hours of their,
Yeah.
yeah, depending on who it is, who's.
Anything further you guys want to talk about this MOU?
Chris, I just think you've done a really nice job just starting out, taking all the different information that you've gathered up and kind of making it applicable to us, so good job, I guess.
Yeah,
kudos.
thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah. So I just also want to throw out there, if you have any specific questions that you want to walk through, so like any of these additional questions about specific programs, if you want to see any of those examples, feel free to call and schedule a meeting with me. I'd be happy to sit down and talk to you all about what some of those might mean.
Where can we find the city's comprehensive plan and downtown targeted area master plan?
On the website, we can have maybe a shared presentation at our next meeting. City staff can bring both the comp plan and the downtown targeted area master plan too.
And if we want to find them, they're just right on the website.
It is online on our website.
Okay.
But this is to be treated as very fluid, so going into this, the 5 categories are really what's most important, and underneath those are kind of things that are workable.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would love to see examples of the categories, but, because you said there's examples of this stuff, but I can wait. I trust you guys.
Okay, moving on. Any new topics for discussion? Anybody would like to bring up on the bid board?
There was one that was presented. Mike Beacom had shared a report from Main Street America about housing guidebook for local leaders. You are all local leaders, and providing in this body. So the document in its entirety, it's really thick. I have a copy with me, but it was also, the digital copy was presented to you all.
I started
A few different action items. Did any of you all
I
peruse
started reading it.
or continue to read it? I think it's a fantastic resource, so thank you for sharing it, sir.
Yeah, I shared it, but I didn't read it yet either, so there's a lot there. But, I mean, WDC is a good resource, and I'm grateful that they put that stuff out there, so.
So, just a few points that staff took from the guidebook. Few stats, I guess. One of the points that the WEDC hammers home, but this is also a Main Street America document, not just the WEDC. The total monthly economic impact of an occupied housing unit in a downtown. It's on pages 18 and 19. Or excuse me, I think it's on pages 35 through 37. One of those 2 chunks. They use Mason City, Iowa as an example community. They're very similar to Stevens Point, population of about 29,000. So similar in size, and they estimate the total economic impact of an occupied housing unit to be about $1,450 to $2,400 per month. So that's just a monthly economic impact that's generated, not just taxes or utility bills, but also spending within the district. There's a few other resources about taking stock of housing assets, so how we can better manage data and acquire data about the housing market in downtown Stevens Point. And then some recommendations on how to approach codes and regulations. So there's a few points that staff took out, but if you have any more.
Yeah, I mean, I'd offer just a couple of thoughts on that, because it's definitely something that we've been heavily involved in. One is building out downtown housing is expensive. There's a high demand for it, but when you're working with old buildings, once you start tearing into them, you are subject to a lot of things that you're not aware of, until, so it's a challenge, and that's why I think that there are a lot of programs that exist to help with that, but it can be terribly expensive. One thing we found in Wapaka is that, another thing is that their downtown housing housed a lot of the lower income and in many cases problematic or high crime. And so their downtown program is more progressive than Stevens Point's in that it allowed for some improvements in non-facade related things. Well, when you saw that population started to move out, and those apartments became more higher end because ultimately that's what covered that work. And so that can displace that. In terms of the downtown economic viability, that is better for your businesses, but it is a factor in terms of, a lot of those where you have housing that's not been touched in a long time, that becomes cheap, affordable housing for a different sector. So Stevens Point probably has less of that because this downtown has been renovated a lot over the last 2 decades, and so a lot of that turnover's happened. I've shared this with Ryan and with Chris, and I would at some point like to see Stevens Point explore the possibility of some of our unfinished spaces, having those become eligible for improvements to add housing above. The building that Bill Sherrill is doing now that he bought could have been a candidate for that, but that's going to be second floor commercial. Mm-hmm. There are a couple others, though, that are still shells. Mm-hmm. And adding people that are downtown, that are good tenants of downtown, that spend money downtown, it's a great investment for the community and the business district. But we don't really have a program that allows that to be affordable. And where construction is right now, it's tough to justify that. There is, I mean, I'll tell you, with what we have, there is no shortage of demand with people who want to live in vaulted ceilings and downtown buildings. But, you know, building that out, they're not people that are going to spend what you see at Northside Yards or others, but, you know, they love that type of dwelling. So the demand is there. It's just getting over that hump. I think you need a little help, whether that comes from the city or other programs, I don't know. So.
Actually, that was part of the thought process too, though, when we just approved the window replacement thing, because a lot of the spaces that are up there, right now you go up there and it's all dark, but once you reestablish windows and you see the light, it kind of helps you see the light and you see the potential, and so we're hoping that that may be a catalyst for some of the further development as well.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that program up. Maybe it should be a short announcement about that. The city did create and approve a grant program to reopen blocked-in, bricked-in windows in downtown. So that does exist, and I think it's at $20,000.
A lot of times, just a window project on its own wouldn't qualify for the facade improvement grant, but talking to the architect from the Main Street program, he felt that there's a lot of buildings that its historical value has really been impacted by the infilling of those windows that took place back in the 70s, and it's really taken away from the facade. And once you reestablish those windows and you see what it looks like from the outside, what it can look like, and then all of a sudden you see the additional light on the inside, that where they just were going to do the window, all of a sudden they get it provides some initiative to do even further. So we basically developed, and we are the first community in Wisconsin to develop such a program to encourage that. So those projects, like I said, hopefully will be a catalyst of more things to come. So that got approved by council last month, I think.
Wonderful. Any other new topics we'd like to discuss or add to these minutes that have been brought up today?
There is a hand raised online. I know
Ooh, public comment was at the beginning. We cannot take public comment at this time.
Sorry, Mr. Rourke. We do have an agenda item at the top of the agenda for public comment right away.
If you would like something on our agenda for next time, please email Chris to get it to our agenda group. Bring it up next time. Outside of that, if anybody does have agenda items that they would like on the next meeting, please get them to Chris Rosalind or myself before a week prior to our next meeting, so we can get that on our agenda and published with enough time before our meeting. Our next meeting is the first Tuesday of May, which is May 2nd at 2:30. Location TBD. Watch for the calendar invite.
And I will not be in attendance, so Ryan Karnowski will be directing or be of assistance for you all.
Sounds good.
Get the B team.
Would you still say that if he was still in here?
Yes. I definitely would.
All right, agenda item number 6, we need a motion for adjournment.
You don't. You can just
I
adjourn.
thought you needed to make it. I didn't think you needed to pass it.
Just adjourn.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Yep. Agenda's exhausted. We stand adjourned.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.